Welcome to Happy Times and Places, a positively inclined Doctor Who commentary podcast in which I, Toby Haydoke, go to a computation matrix to watch an episode of Doctor Who and to see if I can identify my special guest's favourite things about it.
Hello, I'm Tom Curley, or Daren Thomas, or Daren Thomas Curley, depending on where you know me from. I know, confusing, isn't it? I'm English-born Irishman. I am also a neurodivergent writer with autism and ADHD. So the reason I mention that is that I might take a while to get to what I'm trying to say, and I probably will go off at tangents, but I'll endeavour to do my best, promise. Anyway, thank you, Toby, for allowing me to suggest something which isn't just any old story for me, a Doctor Who story. This has stayed with me over the years. It's probably my favourite Doctor Who story of all time.
Oh, well, it's an unusual edition of Happy Times and Places. Well, it's not particularly unusual, I suppose, but there are unusual elements to today's broadcast, the first of which is that because of the nature of the timetable under which this has been recorded, I have feedback from listeners from episodes 1 and 2 as I go into episode 3, and as that is always valued but not always available because I don't have a system, I may as well launch into some of those. There is another. The other unusual. There's a couple of unusual things. I don't know if I'll mention them all. The other unusual, one of the other unusual things about today, is that I've had to hook up my DVD external drive, DVD not Blu-ray, to. I don't have a Blu-ray one. I have a DVD one. Does it play Blu-rays? I don't know. I don't think it does. Anyway, we're getting the DVD of The Deadly Assassin because. Again, unusually, I decided to watch this story for fun before watching it for whatever this is, work, artistic expression, hard-wrought documentary, and scatty man rambling. And I'd noticed that the iPlayer version of this does not have the proper episode ending to episode 3. So I've hooked up the DVD because the Blu-ray I can't play by hooking up to. You don't need to know my domestic arrangements, but what I'm saying is it's a palaver and I need a man cave, but I haven't got one. So I'm here in my man cupboard with the DVD. So I've broken the DVD out of its. It's lodged next to a trilobite and Dick Van Dyke. And in order that, because I could have lied, couldn't I? I could have just pretended it had those last split seconds and the freeze frame. But I want to watch it as God / Holmes Hinchcliffe Maloney. They're as close as we get intended. So I'm watching it on DVD rather than on the iPlayer, which has been my usual route of late. And maybe I'll tell you about the other unusual thing later. But let's see. So, from episode 1, I had a bit of feedback. David Gillespie Pratt said, funny enough, we're watching Auf Wiedersehen Pet, and the game we play is, can you spot the shot they'll use in the freeze frame closing credits? But as you said, when the picture does freeze, it looks a bit naff. Oh, I'd even forgotten I talked about that. Yes, talking about frozen videotape, which I do think they got rather carried away with in the 80s and looks worse. Worse is the wrong word because it looks good in the 70s, but it is degraded by the 80s. It's VT versus film, that perennial war that is, for me, largely won by film. Add this, although I like the immediacy of VT, I wouldn't have liked Doctor Who if it was all on film. I found all film productions a little bit distancing. Isn't that weird? But it was the type of film as well. I found the Euston stuff and the ITC stuff a little bit distancing in a way I don't find Doctor Who, but maybe because Doctor Who is mixed with videotape, or maybe because a lot of the sort of cosy, more BBC, the sort of homespun stuff that tended to be what we watched rather than big films. I don't think for any reason other than what was on and around when I was in and around. Anyway, yes, I've never quite found all film productions as accessible, and they certainly they did seem a bit more grown up. I'm sure I've got memories of the last Quatermass and feeling that was quite a grown-up thing because it had Land Rovers and jumpers and film. If you've got Land Rovers, jumpers, film and shotguns, that seems to me to be very grown-up sort of drama. Anyway, David Gillespie Pratt also says of episode 1, add this to the list of almost perfect episodes. Exceptionally well plotted and directed, and builds to a very effective cliffhanger. And one of the very few, maybe only, actors named Pratt in Doctor Who, so I very much approve. Nev Fountain, yes, Nev Fountain says, and I think does it go backwards? Oh, I think it might go backwards. Hang on, let's go to the bottom and start up, shall we? Yes. Okay, so I'm going to start going backwards now. Lisa and Andrew point out that, they just tell me what cash and carry was, which I knew. I was querying the cash and carry Constantinople joke, but I'm aware cash and carry were basically bulk shops, retail warehouses where you'd go and buy stuff in bulk, but you could only do that if you were a shopkeeper. But actually a friendly shopkeeper took pity on us because we didn't have any money, so I would go with him once every couple of months and stock up on essentials, baked beans and tins of tomatoes and cartons of orange juice and things like that. So it wasn't that I didn't know what cash and carry meant, Lisa and Andrew, but thank you for your helpful answer. It was just the joke, cash and carry Constantinople. I guess there's some alliteration there, and I suppose the joke is from having something as mundane in English as cash and carry with the sort of the rather more exotic and worldly Constantinople. But if that's all the joke was, that if the suggestion is that you picked it up from a cash and carry in Constantinople, I know all the constituents parts. It just doesn't. I'm aware as I'm saying this out loud that I've examined this far too much, and I wish I hadn't said I don't really understand the joke of that, because it's not that it distracted me so much, or that I think it's a howler. It just doesn't quite hang together for me. Anyway, I hope someone has learnt what a cash and carry is from that. I remember not liking this as a child. No Sarah, no proper console room. This is Keith Say now. I now adore the wooden one. And no scarf. It was all new and different, and that was before being scared by the boiled egg-eyed man. To which Frank Shells replies, the crispy master and the doctor's foot getting stuck in the railway points. The only things I remembered about it afterwards. I saw it at age 8. The hero trapped on a train track made much more of an impression than the drowning freeze frame that Mary Whitehouse had a go at. Though, of course, I hadn't realised that the Master was a returning villain until I got some of the Target books with him a year or two later. I probably found all the talky bits in the capital a bit boring. That I think Frank's responding to the fact that I wasn't over the moon about the episode 2 ending, and for Frank it was more memorable. Anthony Story, great story, a great podcast. I'll take that. For Trevor Smith, I bloody love this story. As someone who grew up during the Pertwee era, my doctor, I was thrilled when the rotting skeleton face was revealed as the Master. I knew Roger Delgado had died, so I never expected the Master to come back. Also, as a very earnest 15-year-old, we were all earnest 15-year-olds, weren't we, Trevor? Ha ha! I was very pleased that this was a very serious story. This would show my family that Doctor Who wasn't a children's programme. No chance, lol. Very much looking forward to the rest of the story. Trevor, you speak my language. That's exactly, I was earnest. I wanted it to be serious. I wanted to show my family. We all have shared experience, do we not? Matt Foy, capital letters. What has happened to the magic of Toby Haydock? Ha ha ha! Someone had to, because that is what it was this, wasn't it? That the famous Dwas review said, what has happened to the magic of Doctor Who, which is now evoked whenever somebody wants to take the piss out of fans overreacting to an episode they haven't liked. A wonderful episode and podcast, says Matt. I used this story as a gateway to classic Who once upon a time, despite it being somewhat atypical. A ray of sunshine in turbulent and troubling times. There's Matt referring to the outside world, which, yes, as I record this, the United Kingdom is going through some troubling situations, shall we say, and I don't want to fixate on those too much, because I think what I'm better off doing is trying to be interesting and or funny and or at least distracting about Doctor Who, because I think that is about the limit of my capabilities. But sending best wishes out to everybody there, and hopefully trying to soothe the brow of anyone that's slightly agitated by the state of the nation. We have more in common than divides us, and we will get there. Nev Fountain. So Nev Fountain, this is what's made me work back, because I've got a few messages from Nev. So Nev, first of all, said, one of my absolute favourites, a story that effortlessly redefined the Doctor's personal story and made it better in a way that modern viewers could not dream of emulating. The ultimate reboot. That's a really interesting way of putting it. And actually, this is the other thing that is an odd influence on today's broadcast, is that walking the dog yesterday, I listened to a podcast I like very much called A Hamster with a Blunt Penknife, where they have had the season 14 a Strictly Come Hamster, which is a sort of face-off between all of the stories, and people have to advocate or bin stories that they like or don't. And Deadly Assassin came in for some stick from some areas, and all points made very, very well and very, very entertainingly, and all from a place of love, and all very articulately done. And, I found it hard to disagree with the points they were making, even though I disagree with the points they were making. Do you know what I mean? I thought all of the criticisms were reasonable, and they were about different things from, this being the starting point of the sort of descent from Gallifrey into something really interesting, to being something a bit more mundane, about the fact that it, but by the Doctor having roots and them being, so recognisably sort of Earth type, really, that diminished the Who element of the character, and that mystery of the show, which is its, central and most important partner. A lot of that, and they didn't like George Praver, the person criticising Lee McMenemy, who was very entertaining and a very good broadcaster, and made very good points. I didn't like George, and others on the podcast stuck up for Deadly Assassin, but it was just that I've never had it before where I've been podcasting on a story I've adored, and then I've listened to a podcast which has a section where the story I'm podcasting about and adore has a lot of criticism, and, as I say, fairly legitimate criticism. But I hope it won't put me off my stride, because thus far I've been absolutely loving this. But it was instructive that, as I say, the comments, I sort of the negativity about Deadly Assassin, I did find hard to argue with, and there were some comments from listeners too that were critical of the story, and in ways largely that I thought were fair enough, and some of them centering around this episode we're about to see. So, yeah, there are no definitive answers, and there are no wrong opinions. Well, I mean, there are some wrong opinions, but let's not get into that. Nev Fountain again says, I will share my personal canon here. I like to think The Deadly Assassin is a sequel to the McGann movie, at least as far as the Master is concerned. At the end of Frontier in Space, he is captured by the Daleks and executed. When we follow the events of the TV movie, then we follow the events of the TV movie, where he is sucked into the mini Eye of Harmony and spat out onto the planet Tercerus. He knows he can only renew himself by re-exposing himself to the source of that power, hence the events of Deadly Assassin. Yes, adds Nev at the end, I am quite mad. Rob Davidson says, Deadly Assassin is just bloody glorious, isn't it? It's as rich and complex and spicy as a really good Christmas pud. Everyone involved is on absolutely top form. Glad you love it as much as I do. Nev Fountain's back again a day later and says, and I have to say, this is the most prescient story ever. Not only does it predict AI, virtual reality, hacking, predictive algorithms, and the freaking Matrix, it also predicts a guy running for president to avoid being prosecuted for his crimes. Yes, I know that aspect of the story was pilfered from any source, but it's so damn cool. I think it is satire, 50 years in the making. So there we go. So that is episode. That is the response. The series of responses to episode 1. And as for episode 2, John Deere says the cliffhanger was meant to be the cliff fall, wasn't it? I haven't looked that up since I added to your message, John. But yeah, I certainly think that the train one was a compromise from what had been intended, because the episode was not running to the correct time. But that was something lurking in the recesses of the back of my head. Chris Williams is telling me, heads up on part 3, iPlayer is the Mary Whitehouse cut. Yes, indeed, Chris, and that's worth talking about when we get to the episode. I'm slightly worried about what I will talk about when the episode is on, because it's an episode that I actually, when I got to for Running Through Corridors, the book I wrote with Rob Shearman, I didn't actually have an awful lot to say about it, but maybe we'll get to that, which I think is fascinating, because I do think it's a brilliant episode. David Gillespie Pratt back in says, I love the joy and passion for this one. By remarkable coincidence or not, George Pravda popped up in an episode of Callan we were watching the other day, playing a Soviet dissident with a wife played by Hannah Pravda. Art imitating life, perhaps, except for the assassination attempt, of course. Alex Kafajoglu says, I've often wondered about Runcible and the Doctor recognizing each other, and the facelift comment that vexed me so last week. I think I'd always put it down to the Doctor having a harder life and going through generations a lot quicker than your average Time Lord stuck on Gallifrey. Yes, that's what I thought, except that the Hartnell Doctor is so much older than Runcible, which suggests that Runcible hasn't regenerated at all, because he says, have you had a facelift? Definitely I can explain away the regenerations like that through having adventures the Doctor's gone through at a quicker rate. But why was Hartnell so old looking? And it does beg the question, though, that what the hell was Barusa up to between the Deadly Assassin and the Five Doctors? I mean, who knows? But he was living quite a rackety life, wasn't he? Perhaps all that power, he was availing himself of various local facilities and exhausting himself. Money and power. Guy Lambert says, I think you nailed something here about this story. Even if some fans don't like it, nobody can argue that it's anything other than a beautifully created world with a consistent vision right down to the props and costumes. There's no mucking about here for larks and silliness. It's a radical reinterpretation done with intelligence. Now, Fountain, on episode 2 now, I had more of a problem with Runcible dying with a knife between his shoulder blades. No staser weapon. Why no regeneration? Holmes conveniently bypasses that get-out-of-jail-free card when he wants a good death. Chris Williams adds, blimey, I'd never thought of that. Well, that's the whole thing ruined. Yeah, sorry if we've just ruined everything for you. And Steve White adds, hard to believe this was so long ago. I was barely 6 on transmission, but it feels like yesterday. I started watching the series around season 10. Again, so many memories, considering how young I was. So I wasn't really cognizant of the history of the Time Lords. I can understand why long-term fans felt the portrayal of the Time Lords as dusty bureaucrats usurped everything that came before with regards to their all-powerful nature. However, this was also gripping and believable when I was small. And now I am an old farty, I have to wonder if newer, equally young fans feel the same way about the whole heretical to the older generation timeless child storyline. I guess the moral of this story is some things evolve, we'd best get over it. And that's a moral that I can academically accept, Steve, whilst emotionally railing against it with all that is at my core. But that is the nature of fandom, and yes, absolutely. And this is why I've found it interesting to contemplate why, one allows certain huge sea changes to the series, and is very cross with others. And I was certainly, and I tried to write when I wrote my Indefinable Magic on Space Babies, which if you haven't listened to, I hope you do. I tried to address change and how we accept change, because the change of tone and, it seemed to me, style of Space Babies, which was an attempt to sort of get to grips with how we approach things rather than to just approach an episode with value judgments, which I think is kind of less interesting. So I hope this is a mix of both of those things, where I'll give you my value judgments, where my reaction is very personal, and that these sorts of stories are very much to my taste. But I'll also try to frame them with a bit of circumspection and try to understand why other people might have different points of view, and more importantly, try to see why I don't share those points of view, or why I would apply the same points of view as them to different stories, but won't to this one. and then it is all about taste. But I can't just all be about taste. I think some Doctor Who stories are objectively better than others, better produced, better written, better acted. But even then you get into, because I know some people who think, well, some performances. I mean, I do get Lee McMenamin's dislike of George Pravda's performance, even though I quite like it. But I've seen, for example, some people think that, say, Martin Jarvis in Vengeance and Varos is wooden, and I think that's a complete misinterpretation of an underplayed, subtle performance. But if the performance doesn't work for that person, who am I just saying? Well, I'd go, well, I think I know more about acting than you do. But then you go, well, no, then you're just making your opinion. You're saying that your opinion is an objective thing. And that, of course, is where danger lies. And to the wider, the wider way that we conduct ourselves these days, a lot of people, refuse to objectively take other people's interpretations of things as anything other than a total aberration. Whereas, I always sort of go in assuming I'm wrong, but just hoping I can justify my opinions or that I turn out to be right. I'm very easily swayed. But I don't think I will be. And as I say, I was very, very sympathetic to those negative comments about The Deadly Assassin in The Hamster with a Blunt Penknife, which if you've not listened to, please do. It's a lovely podcast, and the Strictly Come Hamster format is very, very good indeed. Although, judging by the name, I'm assuming, when the mics are switched off, there's all sorts of kicking and bullying, and, Joe is there stamping on people and saying, "You will like the power of Kroll," or something. But let's not get into that. I look forward to the story unravelling in the press. But for now, there's no bullying in this podcast because it's just me in a cupboard. Although, of course, we have the pre-recorded thoughts of Daren Thomas, lovely Daren Thomas, who knows a thing or two about television and script writing because it's his medium. And we're 1-1. We both chose the cliffhanger to part 1. Part 2, he chose the Master, and I chose the whole sort of kit and caboodle of Gallifrey and its realisation. And now, 20 minutes into this podcast, told you it was an unusual one. We've had a bit of preamble. We are going to watch episode 3 of The Deadly Assassin, unusually for me, on DVD, because I am doing it properly. By watching the one with the cliffhanger. And I'm going to press play in 3, 2, 1. I hope you don't hear any noise. I mean, I don't want to say I'm paranoid, but it seems to me that every time I start recording, our next door neighbour starts making coffee with their loud coffee machine or playing the piano. Or I don't know what's happening now, drilling a mammoth's tooth with an industrial-sized probe. But, part of me thinks, are they just listening out for when I start? But I haven't got much time to grab recordings at the moment. So apologies. Let's just say it's the Matrix interfering if you do hear anything in the background. So we have this beautiful, beautiful imagery. And this film is glorious, and obviously it's been remastered. So, but I always felt that the film style of things like the Professionals, as I say, had a slight gloopiness, that it wasn't quite as sharp as this, and so I always felt slightly distant from it. And the sound on film as well is a little bit more sort of echoey and beyond you. This is a TV film. I don't know, but the aesthetic of film in Doctor Who, whenever Doctor Who goes on film, it suddenly looks better. But productions that were all film, I always struggled with. Anyway, there we go. I may have done the next door neighbour a disservice. It may be roadworks outside. There are roadworks going on outside as well, which had stopped when I started recording and now seem to be going in full force. I love the egg. See, now, this is, when I did Running Through Corridors, I was expecting to go, I love this bit, and all these bits are lovely. It's a series of vignettes. but what can I say apart from that's a nice visual, that's well realised, because they are all nice visuals, they are well realised. And this is where we come to the nub of what this episode is. This was quite a famous episode even before I'd seen any Doctor Who, you know, write-ups maybe in Doctor Who: A Celebration, but there's certainly, I knew coming into Deadly Assassin, I knew of episode 3 as being, you know, the visual tour de force. It was, by the time I was reading about it, it was spoken of in somewhat hallowed terms. I'm guessing that's a piece of stock footage, but I could be wrong. But that's good. You've got the sound. You've got the sort of dentist drill sound in the back of the sort of parched desert. It plays upon all the senses. David Maloney has an absolute field day here. I was very amused listening to the commentary of this. It was at a time when I was getting a bit fed up of people being rude about the prospect of moderators and commentaries, because I think I'd started doing them by now. And I texted a friend and said, but when Bernard Horsfall's eyes appeared, and Bernard Horsfall goes, "Who's that, Tom?" I said, "Bernard Horsfall's just failed to recognise his bloody self. This is why you need a moderator." I love, again, this bit is brilliant. It's such a, I mean, there's something scary about clowns anyway, isn't there? But it's really effectively staged, and it's creepy and it's strange, and that clown makeup is really, really good. But yes, the nub of this episode, but it's great that they don't even bother to try and say, now how's the Doctor got from that to there? They just go, we're just going to cut to the bits that are interesting here, and that adds to the sort of dreamlike nature. Are we to think he's walked and they just haven't showed us that bit, or is he fading from experience to experience? It doesn't state that definitively, and I think that's fine. And you know, a biplane is somehow a scarier plane than a more modern plane, and it's something to do with the fact that the pilot will be cowled and have those old-fashioned goggles. You know, there is something that, you know, there's something about the sort of recent history, even the relatively recent history that it was then, that gives it a slightly spooky edge rather than an old-fashioned edge. I don't quite know how that works. Because it's, you know, it's post the sort of gothic sensibility. It's not the stuff of horror films. But there is something, you know, and of course the World Wars were scary, but to my generation they weren't scary. Actually, they were things of comic book hero stories. So the fact but there is something about that cowl and those glasses and the fact the leather and that is a bit scary, and the fact that the machine gun seems to be working on its own. But yes, the nub of this adventure, of this episode, which was a famous episode, but as I say, I only discovered later that it originally had been seen as a great aberration. When I came to this story, episode 3 was a visual tour de force. Hadn't registered. I mean, it had registered in the book. As I say, my brothers had said, "Oh, it's a story about the Doctor being chased by this guy," you know, and that was what had sort of spoken to them about the story. So it was seen as a main part of it. But I wonder if that's what they'd remembered from watching the episode and sort of imposed that upon the book when they'd then read the book later. Because my brothers are older than me, so would have been old enough to have watched the story. But nothing happens in this episode. In other, I was very kind about the car chase in Planet of Spiders episode 2, but I do think it's an indulgent. I was kind about it because it's a podcast where I'm nice, and it's, you know, it's fun, but it's indulgent, and you can sort of get away with it because it's 6 parts of television from 1973, 74, sorry. But this, and I would go, you know, and if I was to show it to people today, that mythical audience or whatever, I would, you know, cut it down or get rid of it. I wouldn't get rid of any of this. In fact, the only bit I might get rid of is the bit with Solis, which has been sort of added to give us some perspective from outside of the story. And in fact, I remember when I read the cast list in Doctor Who magazine, it said Peter Mayock played Solis. I was interested because Peter Mayock plays Narmin in Pyramids of Mars, and here he's back again. But I'd not remembered him in the book. I'd not remembered that character. I'd not remembered that moment. But I do like these two. And I think Eric Chitty is absolutely delightful. Yes, one of the correspondents with Hamster in a Blank Penknife said that both of these actors were bad. Now, as I say, I can understand people having a problem with George Pravda, but I rather like him. But I cannot. But I get it if that performance doesn't translate for people. I do not get anybody who doesn't find Eric Chitty absolutely perfect, and in fact wanting to take him home in their pocket. So here's Peter Mayock as Solis in the background, who we've previously seen as Ibrahim Namin, very good in Pyramids of Mars. He was from Birmingham. He did some theatre in Ireland, but he was from Birmingham, and he ended up working in retail in Birmingham towards the end of his life. So he was born in Birmingham, died in Birmingham. So a Birmingham-based actor, being a regionally based actor myself, Manchester actor, I always like to see it when somebody's brought in from elsewhere, but died in the late 90s, which is a shame. So he was around. Somebody could have spoken to him, interviewed him, but didn't. In fact, I could have done. I wasn't far from Birmingham. I love that. That's a great piece of camera work. The film camera work on this is brilliant, but I love that pan up from the Doctor and then catching Goth standing like that. Sorry, the traitor who we're not sure who it is, standing silhouetted on the. In the sort of ravine there, and it gets silhouetted against the sky, is brilliant. This is beautifully filmed. Just love the chalky whiteness of the landscape as well. I think the whole setting is really well done. And the Doctor's shirt is torn, and now here's a spider. That's not a great effect, but it's a way of going, what else is scary? Let's throw a spider. I mean, the spider doesn't even attack the Doctor, but it's just there to sort of lurk and go, there's another menace here. But, if you break this down to what it is, it doesn't really make any sense. Why is the repository of Time Lord minds a sort of landscape where very 20th century sort of cosplay fighting can go on, and how do we? We've already had one example of, and why is he thirsty? We've already had one example of, I deny this reality, which the mind robber, the previous sort of foray into the fantastical and strange, has every single cliffhanger. It seems to be is solved by them going, but it's not real. And the Celestial Toymaker suffers from, similar problems where the fantastical elements are. Have to be sort of joined in with, but actually particularly Mind Robber, also directed by Maloney, and you sort of go, well, if it isn't real, it's in terms of its setting, it's the most unreal place, perhaps bar the land of fiction, the Doctor Who has ever been set, and yet it's actually the most visceral and physical episode probably up to this point, where the Doctor bleeds and where there's a punch-up and where people need water and where people fall out of trees and there are explosions. And this is where he's going through his bag because he needs kit and survival. So it's a real, you're thrown into the wilderness and forced to survive, but in an environment that is absolutely made up. So you could, if you were not buying into this, and I know some people don't buy into this episode, perfectly legitimately go, well, it's all rubbish, because he could just go, well, I don't believe this, which he's already done once, and how does this work anyway? I suppose what you say is it's a battle of the minds, and the strongest mind conjures, the hardest difficulties to overcome, and that they are manifested in this way, and that each one's creativity is being set. So it's like an organic chess game in a way, but instead of, and so there are limits to how you can move, and they're the limits of human or Time Lord physical strength. So the Doctor can't jump up a tree. If the Doctor does get shot, it's gonna hurt. So in the same way that a bishop can only move diagonal, the doctor can only climb up a tree, and if he moves into that square, he is going to get hit and lose something. So yeah, it's like kind of organic chess, but it's an excuse to have a sort of boy's own adventure. So on the page, it's probably not terribly exciting. Although the clown, I think all that's really interesting. The egg, I don't know how much of I should have had a look at because sometimes you look at the film scripts and the writer sort of essentially goes, I'm thinking of the fight in Web of Fear episode 4. That's entirely Douglas Camfield in the shooting script. In the Haseman Lincoln script, it is very, they flee. Blake is killed, becomes they climb onto some boxes. Blake gets grabbed by the ankle, pulled off, and bludgeoned to death. All of that. So I think I've just made a very convincing case saying it's like an organic chess match. But the story would lose plot-wise, and I know people who judge their Doctor Who, based on the plot or the script. Plot-wise, this is a great liberty, really, because it's all devised to simply have the Doctor work out who the villain is. Now, I think we already have. I don't mind that we already have, because it's not a whodunit, really. Even though it is therefore then quite amusing that the great pains they go to hide the fact that it's Bernard Horsfall, and he has to whisper, and there he has to have a hairdryer attachment on his face, because even and yes, that's the thing that's transporting him to the Matrix or whatever. So yeah, there's Peter Mayock, who has a beard in Pyramids of Mars, so looks very different, which is why he's able to be here, not that long afterwards. But this happened. Michael Bilton, also in this story, was also in Pyramids of Mars. I wonder if, because I do it when I saw Kevin Eldon pop up in Game of Thrones for the second time, I was like, oh, are there not any other actors about who could play a funny guard? And I wonder if there are any actors watching closely going, hang on, this has got two people who I've never been in Doctor Who, and there's two people in it who are in it not that long, and bloody Bernard Horsfall's in it every 5 minutes. I mean, if they're real fans, then I think you'll find George Pravda and Eric Chitty have also been in it. And Eric Chitty was in it with Michael Bilton too. Who'd you have to screw to be the Deadly Assassin? Ooh, bamboo. I've got bamboo in my garden. It's a pernicious beast. It provides us nice cover from next door. No offence to next door. But it just gives us a bit of privacy. Although, actually, perhaps I should have some between my recording booth and next. Perhaps that's what I need inside, because it gives us a little bit of shelter from outside, so they can get on with their summer garden business, and we can get on with ours without being forced to sort of go, oh hi. It's not that we don't get on or anything like that, but when you're in your own garden, you want to feel you can sort of go out without having to make small talk with somebody if you're not so inclined. So it's nice to have a little bit of something, isn't it? So it's bamboo that he makes the blowpipe out of. Oh, because bamboo splinters you'd have to be very careful. Bamboo splinters can be a beast. But I like how practical the Doctor is in this. Tom Baker, I mean, Pertwee is very practical with machinery, isn't he? Building things and tinkering. But Tom Baker really is. I resist saying he's an action hero, because he still has the sort of, he's the magic space Harlequin, but my God, he's gritty and capable he's strong. I mean, I could think of fancier words, but he's a strong presence. He's a downright and capable physical presence, and there's no nonsense about him. He can handle himself in a fight. Now, again, I'm not sure how I feel about that. I'm not sure I have the need for the Doctor to handle himself in a fight, and I with my head, I prefer John Pertwee's sort of nonsense space judo, because that is providing us with a physical out, but not saying might is right. It's a self-defense. It's one that doesn't make people bleed or break any of their limbs. But there's something about the danger of Tom Baker and the brute force that he has that is sort of very convincingly done, and it matches the stories. I guess it's a harsher. I've used this phrase, and it's a phrase that Hinchcliffe himself uses, more muscular, and I don't mean that physically, but it's a more muscular universe, and that appeals to me, which is odd because I think without its humour and its lightness of touch, and its rejection of sort of might is right and physical violence, Doctor Who would not be the show that we know it is. I guess everything in Doctor Who that I like exists within the whole context of Doctor Who. So this is a refreshing change from the norm, and perhaps that's why I like it. But then it would be nothing without the norm, so I shouldn't be too hard on the norm. I'm trying to articulate the admittedly contradictory feelings I have about them. Well, no, they're only contradictory when I articulate them. When I watch them, I love it. I love that. The great stuntful. It's really well executed. There's no flaws in this in terms of the staging of this at all. And you know that sometimes Baker is Terry Walsh and Horsfall is Eddie Powell. But apart from in the fight in the swamp, I don't think you can see the joins. I love the fact that I love that little dart that he knows, and then the fact that he has to tear his trousers open and inject himself with an antidote again. As realistic as Doctor Who has ever felt, this sort of jungle warfare that is a bit evocative of those sort of World War II comic book type things, which again, Doctor Who is kind of the antidote to, he says, as Bernard Horsfall sticks the antidote in his leg for the poison dart. But again, because it evokes those things, it kind of it lends it a certain credibility to me as a younger viewer, as Trevor Smith said, as an earnest teenager wanting my show to be taken seriously. But as I say, when reading the book, I had totally forgotten about this bit, and I hadn't particularly, what. And I remember when I did first watch it, I was like, oh, okay, what's happening here? Okay, he's going to try and do something, and it's odd that for an episode of essentially padding, that all of this, I will happily watch. And find the padding of the padding, or at least it's not really padding. It's an attempt to try and show that there's still danger on Gallifrey. That the Doctor can't just go to sleep on the job. There are forces at work against him, and he's got two allies who will defend him. So it's actually a useful illustration of the story still continuing, that we haven't pressed pause to just let this particular part of the story carry on. So it's a necessary beat, but I do find myself sort of going, yeah, all right, just get rid of him and let's go back. And also I love the fact that George Pravda doesn't even bother to stand up. I mean, and again, that's just a slight sign of where, we're having all this wonderful stuff going on film, and we've, we're only allowed a couple of camera angles, and an old man, in order to pull off what in other circumstances could have been a bit of an action sequence, a bit of a moment, but no, it's almost like it's a bit like when I'm on the sofa and I've eaten a bit too much and I want to change the channel and I can't be bothered to stand up and get the remote control that's at the end of the sofa, so I sort of hurl myself there without standing up and sort of press the button until it does something and then sink back into my sort of round-bellied repose that I was in, like a sated weeble. And when I say strong, look how beautifully filmed this is. And I have some of these. I think they're called dogweeds, these pink flowers that the Doctor's hiding behind. They grow like wildfire in my garden. Was this filmed in my garden? But I've got them in my pond, because I've got a pond. I made a pond out of all the discarded bits of building work that had gone on in our house. So it cost nothing apart from the lino. So I'm quite proud of it. Although I shouldn't have cut the shelves out while I was waiting for the for the lino to come. But anyway, let's not get into that. But yeah, there's various bits of my guy. He looks like he's got a different colour hair on film as well, Horseful. I know it's just the just the different colour palette and texture of film. But he from the goth that's on Gallifrey, he does look like he's been on the beach for a week. But all of this is very well done. But again, so you've got marsh gas in the Matrix, but I suppose that's the Doctor's mind creating a credible reality within the reality that has been created by goth. So yeah, no, it sort of works. But yeah, these pink flowers, I've got some in my pond, but they also grow around the garden like nobody's business, and they are quite pretty, but they are a weed. I never quite know what the rules are about weeds, because if you like them, why can't they stay? Well, because they get in the way. I like some of them. Anyway, let's not get into that. I think there's been enough Toby's garden in here. So here we have the famous. We're leading to the famous cliffhanger. I have to say, my feelings on Mary Whitehouse have changed slightly. I mean, I hated her, and I thought there was a hypocrisy about her, and also the BBC did a drama about her about 15 years ago where it kind of cast her as it was way more sympathetic to her than I think it should have been. There's a sanctimonious hypocrisy about it that I often find with people who try to use religion as a social control or whatever, and that for me, I wanted Doctor Who to be more violent, as a kid and kids, and look, that's a missing bit of Doctor Who, because it was not on the master tape, and it was only it's a slightly less good quality version that exists, isn't it, of the full episode, and they've restored it, and I think taken the footage from episode 4 in order to make it, etc., etc., etc. But yeah, the White House thing is fascinating, because I do now think I'm not anti-TV violence, and I think stories should be honest about the way that they portray violence, but of course stuff is portrayed very differently in these days. And something like The Boys, which is grotesque, but that's a stylistic choice, and the pantomimic nature of the extreme violence in The Boys is part of the point. It's an artistic decision. It's not just gratuitous violence, except it is gratuitous violence as an artistic decision. So is it enough to say, yeah, but they know what they're doing? Well, yeah, but if that does desensitize people to violence or glorify violence, I do have a concern about desensitization to violence and the glorification of violence. But do I worry about it so much that I think films and television actually make people go out and commit violent acts? I don't think I do. And yet I do, in the back of my head, have feelings that actually we should wrangle those things responsibly, particularly in shows that younger people will be watching. And yet, as I say, as a kid, I wanted Doctor Who to be more violent, because it made me feel like a grown-up. And can I wield the old cliche? And it didn't do me any harm. I'm not somebody who gets into fights or anything, but I think male aggression is definitely something that needs to be, that is being looked at now, and I think there's a latency about it that is interesting, but perhaps for another day, because I've used the word interesting, which means I'm about to be dull. Interesting klaxon. So let us say, I mean, Mary Whitehouse I thought was an absurd, sanctimonious creature, and definitely thought, and that sniff that she does on 30 Years in the TARDIS that they take the mickey out of so well on another podcast, a wheezing, groaning sound, where she goes, it's like they're a bit dumb, and you go, you have elected yourself to be somebody who takes television to task whilst being so illiterate in the way that television is made and any sort of artistic process. And as I say, it comes with a little bit, but I see such sanctimony now wielded by people with different religions, and I don't mean actual religions now. So I'm also less askance of people whose convictions come from religious teachings. I used to think, see, religion's awful. It's just an excuse for people. No, people use whatever as their excuse to be sanctimonious or condescending or censorious. It's just that in the late 70s it happened to be a Christian housewife. But I've seen all sorts of, other religions be censorious. But now, the irreligious or the irreligious are equally censorious, but they just use a different justification and methodology. So apologies, religion. I am not a religious person, but I see now that religion is often just is just the delivery method of the egregiousness, and it's not necessarily the fault of religion itself, which has a lot of great uses to a society in terms of giving people moral codes and bringing communities together, etc., etc., etc. So life is much more complicated and nuanced, innit? And The Deadly Assassin 3 is much more complicated and nuanced because on the surface, it is padding. It is completely unnecessary. Doesn't help the plot one little bit. Hasn't really got any exciting lines or character development, and yet I love it to pieces. I remember when I first saw it, watching the story. As I said, episode 1 was a very pleasant surprise, and I was sort of getting all excited about watching episode 3 because episode 3 is the episode. But I've been disappointed by Doctor Who so many times before, and episode 3 of The Deadly Assassin did not disappoint me. I thought it was thrilling. I thought it was well staged. I thought every bit, bar perhaps the spider, which caused me a little shiver of, I might need to make my friends look away at that bit, because it's obviously a string, not a spider's web. Why did they do that? Well, they did it just to throw a spider into the mix because they've got a clown and they've got an egg and they've got a samurai and they've got a train and they've got a train plane. They just needed an automobile. It's a nightmare world, and really effectively done, but also done with that real sort of gritty plausibility, which, as I say, it's probably the story that needed it the least in a way. They could have gone the other way and made it a sort of dreamy, nightmarish world of, whiteouts and strangeness but those dreamlike worlds really turn me off because I immediately believe nothing bad can happen because it's too dreamlike a state. For me, the grounding of this in the visceral and those, you can hear the sort of chinky chanky of the stone as they sort of graze their arms across it, as they crash into it, and you see the blood. They tear the clothes and they're grimy and they're gritty. That grounds the fact that we're in this strange world and says, oh no, but there's real, actual physical danger here. They are going to go. One of them's not going to get out of here alive, even though there's mind trickery going on. And that to me works so much better, even though it seems like a paradox, like exactly the wrong method to stage a dream world by having something that is so earthy and plausible. Actually, it keeps you invested in the story, and it's only when I think about it that I then have to start sort of justifying it on a podcast or whatever. I don't go through those mental pirouettes when I'm watching it. I just go, oh, that's so good. Oh, that's really good. Oh, he does that well. Oh, Tom Baker. Oh, gosh. Oh, that's wow. I mean, I spent the whole episode just doing that, and it didn't disappoint when I first watched it. So then I was very surprised when later, and I was doing some reading and the history of Doctor Who opened up to me, when it was revealed that actually fandom hadn't, fandom being crossed with Doctor Who wasn't a new thing when I was, reading DWB in the era of Trial of a Time Lord and beyond, where it was suddenly a new thing to be furious with your show. Oh no, fans had been furious with the show ages ago, and even with classics like The Deadly Assassin, and of course Trial of a Time Lord has a similar Matrix sequence that I don't think works as well, and it's partially because it's on videotape. but we'll. I mean, I still think it's. I think it's fine, and maybe because it's the second time it's been done in Doctor Who. But I don't think it's the tour de force that this is. That's partially, I guess, maybe because of the direction as well. But I think the film helps, and I think the fact that it's not sort of literary I mean, all Holmes is pastiche. This is war comic strip pastiche in many ways, but it's not sort of florid pastiche in the way that the sort of Dickensian stuff in Trial of a Time Lord is. And I was always a bit immune to holodeck stories in Star Trek: The Next Generation and Dream Worlds generally. Maybe it's because with Deadly Assassin having done it, I don't need to see another one, and I don't think I've ever seen one as good. I will now get lots of messages going, I think you'll find there's an episode of Star Trek Aspidistra in which the Vulcan Deathrite Hoblong is evoked through the medium of emotional space triangles. That is a deeply moving experience that talks about religion and character development in a way that is also consistent with Starfleet mythology. And I'll go, oh, okay, I haven't quite got round to Star Trek Aspidistra because I watched episode 2 and there's a 15-minute scene in the original Klingon and I wanted to kick the telly in. So sorry about that. Anyway, my favourite thing about episode 3 of The Deadly Assassin, well, what do I choose? I love the clown. I love the egg. It's got liquid in it, and I love the way Tom Baker goes. Ah! The cliffhanger's fantastic. The bit with I love the bit with the poison dart where Bernard Horsfall tears his trousers open. I love all the sort of war iconography that gives it, as I say, that sort of it's a boy's own thing, but a grotesque parody of it, which makes it sort of haunting and peculiar, without doing too much with it. But I think what I like most about The Deadly Assassin Part 3, strap yourselves in, folks, is that it's The Deadly Assassin Part 3. There is no other episode that is The Deadly Assassin Part 3. It was always talked about or written about. As I say, I went into it knowing it was a remarkable episode. I came out of it not disagreeing. Now, as I've grown up and I look back and I go, it's actually certainly not more than a sum of... It's less than a sum of its parts, and yet it's you can't really, if you talk about it too much, you can talk yourself out of it being good, because you can say all of those criticisms. The stuff with Solis is seems a bit perfunctory, and as I say, George Pravda can't even be bothered to stand up while it's happening. The traitor is obvious. It's a long time for the plot to go nowhere, and all we learn is the traitor, which we kind of knew, and in plotting terms, it's a huge liberty, but it doesn't matter because it's The Deadly Assassin Part 3. It's remarkable. There's been nothing like it really in the series. I think it's there are brave stabs in Celestial Toymaker, which is hugely flawed and I think not very good. The Mind Robber, which I think is fun, but it's trying to do a slightly different thing, and it's got it has ambition in the way it's trying to change the scope of the show, but it has a much more sort of charming and peculiar sort of fairy tale vibe than this, which has a mind FUCK vibe, and a real commitment to the seriousness of this whole situation, even though it's going, but this is a weird dream world, which it then makes as realistic as possible. So there are so many ways that it couldn't have worked, and yet I think it is staged absolutely fantastically, and it's hard to choose a particular moment because it's a series of excellent moments, and Tom Baker is brilliant. Bernard Horsfall is very good. He doesn't have an awful lot to do. It's a very, he's not having to do lines and stuff, but it needs somebody who, as David Maloney said when he was casting it, was had the stature and the presence to face off against Tom Baker, not just physically, but in terms of presence and in terms of acting prowess. And so that was, that's a huge testament to Horsfall, who I think it's easy to take for granted because he's one of those actors that makes acting look easy, because he's a really good actor, but not a showy one. And I suppose because I wonder if Daren will choose David Maloney, because it's really David Maloney who is clearly very happy on film, and has clearly got the aesthetics absolutely right and is comfortable with the action. So I will say it is David Maloney and his realisation of the fact that The Deadly Assassin Part 3 is The Deadly Assassin Part 3. I really want to just say my choice for this is that it's Part 3 of The Deadly Assassin, because it is a special episode of Doctor Who that somehow contrives to be amazing, despite the fact there's all sorts of reasons you could say that it isn't. But I suppose the key architect of that, but again, there is so much credit that has to go to Baker, Horsfall, Hinchcliffe, Murray Leach, Holmes. But I suppose the sort of the key architect to the success of this particular instalment, although his work is exemplary across the story, is David Maloney. But I do want to sort of acknowledge that it's because it's Part 3 of The Deadly Assassin. So it's Part 3 of The Deadly Assassin as rendered by its brilliant director, David Maloney. Watch now as Daren will choose the clown or something. Oh, it doesn't matter, does it? So Daren has chosen for Part 3. This is my friend Daren Thomas, former script editor of Holby City, a really nice, interesting, enthusiastic guy. A man of great taste when it came to Part 1, but our tastes completely differed for Part 2. So what has Daren chosen for Part 3, Episode 3, the one and only, The Deadly Assassin 3?
My third favourite thing for Episode 3 is a simple concept, again, possibly lost in time because it's been used effectively so recently, even with the likes of Jodie, and going back to Trial of the Time Lord, and that's just the idea of the Matrix itself. And I know that must be terribly boring to fans. They go, what? Back then, there was nothing like it. We'd never heard anything of that. And of course, it predates the film The Matrix, the idea of this receptacle for where the dead Time Lords are placed, and this magical fantasy world is amazing. It's a great concept and played to great effect in the story, the nightmarish visions and the surreal elements of how the Doctor tried to navigate it, and yet he's still in great threat, seemingly attacked by the samurai warrior, the fall from the cliff face, the evil eyes tormenting from the sky, giant spiders, crocodiles, it goes on and on and on. First World War soldier, isn't there? And a surgery moment, and so many horrific, awful things, let alone the infamous Mary Whitehouse cliffhanger. But as a concept, just brilliant and brilliantly realised on a quite limited budget, nicely shot in these locations to give it this slightly surreal yet plausible edge. And you never know where you're going to go with it. It's a concept I love so much that it was, for me, the saving grace of Trial of a Time Lord at the end, just to be able to see, again, more surreal, nightmarish visions was great. I absolutely loved it. So, yeah, that very much was a big high for me and a favourite moment for Episode 3.
I tried to ensure myself, but I don't think I can say the concept of the Matrix, which is a legitimate choice, and as Daren rightly pointed out, has become a thing. I mean, the Matrix films, they even call it the same thing. And I have to say, I don't think the Matrix has ever been done as well since in Doctor Who. I do think it's been a law of diminishing returns, and that's not because, although I do love this period of Doctor Who, I love all periods of Doctor Who, what I do love the fact that, you know, it hasn't been a straight evolution. I was talking to somebody the other day saying, you know, my favourite Sontaran mask is still Lynx's, and that's not to criticise new Doctor Who or even, you know, subsequent classic series Sontarans. I love the fact that when you know, experience tells us that as techniques get better and you know, as budgets are managed better and as they learn to do things better, special effects, masks, design, you know, experience, as designers get more experience and have more influences and learn from the mistakes of the people that went before them, you know, inevitably everything when it comes back will come back improved. And what I love that Doctor Who shows us, and again I think this is instructive for our times, no, actually sometimes things that they did then they might do better than we did now, and that's worth looking back and learning and going, oh, you know, evolution doesn't necessarily and this is ideas too, move in a straight line, and sometimes we need to go back and learn and go, okay, so what were they doing that we're not doing, that we seem to have either lost sight of or forgotten how to do, or replaced with something that looked like it was going to be a better way of doing it but turned out not to be. And I love the fact that, you know, that show about time travel says, well, you know, you can have an episode set in the Matrix, or you can have an episode with a Sontaran, and the most effectively done ones are actually from 1974, 1975. And I think that's instructive. And that's not me being a new series basher, because there is so much in the new series that is clearly done so much better, and not just the aesthetics and the technology. I think sometimes in terms of, you know, the richness of, you know, the sophistication of storytelling and the sophistication, the more that we expect from characters and realizations of worlds. You know, Doctor Who, often a world is, you know, 10 extras in a room, and they're supposed to sort of stand for everybody else on the entire planet. But that's fine, and you get that, and I like that, and I'm fine with that. But, you know, we have changed the way that that our expectations are of things like that, and we have improved the way that we do a lot of that as technology and techniques and all of those sorts of things have got better. But actually, there are still some things that they did then, fighting against the odds with less technology, with less knowledge. Well, knowledge is perhaps wrong, because I think there was some very, very good training in all sorts of crafts that perhaps people don't get now, and historical research in terms of, you know, crafts and design and things like that. So knowledge is perhaps wrong, but accumulation of experience, I guess. So I love the fact that. The Deadly Assassin 3 is still my favourite visit to the Matrix, and the Matrix was the thing that Daren told, but it was not. It was chose, but it was not the thing that I chose. But I'm still. I just think it's a unique episode of Doctor Who. It meant a lot to me, and then I discovered it meant different things to fans before me, which was an equal eye-opener. So it's an episode where the history of the show sort of revolves and changes and evolves, and I think that's fascinating as well, and that's instructive to me as I try to get used to things perhaps about more recent iterations of the show, that I go, well, that's absolutely wrong and misunderstanding the programme. And you go, well, there's episodes you like where people could perfectly legitimately have said the same, but because they happened before you were born, or at least cognizant of them, you never had to get used to them because they were just there. And I think that is fascinating too. And the thing I wasn't going to tell you, but we're getting to the end now, and I've got things to do. I've had a rotten day today where people have tried to be horrid to me, and a few people have sent me messages this week saying that they like this stuff and it sometimes gets them through difficult days, which is extremely touching and flattering, and it's very nice to get those messages, even though it's sometimes, you know, it's sad to hear that people have been going through hard times in the first place. But it is a symbiotic relationship, because instead of feeling sorry for myself, which I have been doing quite a lot today, I got into my cupboard, I watched The Deadly Assassin 3, I wrestled with its complexities and contradictions and what I feel about it, I celebrated it, I enjoyed engaging with your messages and the contribution of Daren, which then helped to shape my response to it, and it's exercised my brain and it's made my brain active, and it's shaken up those fog that had encased it, and hopefully I will go outside now and with a bit more energy and engagement than a world I was trying to hide from because it had winded me in the solar plexus. So I've got to go and do some stuff now, and the sun is shining too. But I wasn't interested. But I'm gonna put some shorts on, and I'm gonna go to the post office. But yeah, Haydock in shorts. That's what I'm gonna leave you on, and that image will be in the mind of the child that's listening. It will be in the mind of you children for a whole week. Haydock in shorts. Yeah, now you've been struck dumb. Thanks for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Haydock, and my special guest this time around is Daren Thomas. I'm grateful to Daren and to the patrons who make these podcasts possible, and they include Paul Kirkley, Richard Riley, Matthew Tate, Alan W. Wright, Matt Foy, Susie Ferguson, Ashley Knight, Stephen Moffat, Ruben Herfindahl, Peter Burns, James Curray-Smith, Peter Harness, Ronald Hayden, Rob Leonard, Christopher Meredith, Gavin McLean, Richard Straw, Neil Tate, Nick Tedston, Tim Arding, Nigel Bromley, Paul Cook, Richard Chalk, Peter Chamberlain, Grant Davidson, John Deere, Chris Dunford Kelp, Paul Dunn, and El Pandras. The music is by Dave Gates, and the artwork by Dylan Patterson. If you would like to become a patron, please go to patreon.com/Toby Haydock, where for as little as £3 a month, you get advance releases, bonus releases, your own special podcast, your own exclusive monthly AMAs, now your own exclusive extended editions of my Who's Round podcast, and all sorts of other goodies. That £3 a month can be reduced if you sign up for a year in one go, and you get 10% off, and that 10% is taken off all of the tiers because they go from 3 to 10 to 20 and beyond. You could give me £1 million if you want. I won't say no. And yeah, I suppose you still get 10% off a million if you sign up for a year in one go. You can also do a one-off contribution if that's your preferred method by going to ko-fi.com/Toby Haydock. There are no inducements there. It's just a way of giving me a tip, I guess. But look, if you can't or are unable to do the financial thing or disinclined so to do, that's fair enough. I'm simply grateful to you for listening. What you can do that costs you nothing but a little of your time is to go to all the places on the internet that these are available, which is Apple, iTunes, Patreon, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever, and even they are now on YouTube. They go up as videos, even though there's no actual visual footage on YouTube. And if you can subscribe, give 5 stars and a couple of lines of review saying nice things. God bless a gentleman called Ken Norton, who is giving really nice reviews everywhere. And Ken, if you're out there, I am really, really grateful because they're considered as well. They're not just saying nice things. They're saying what is nice, and they've been really nice to read. So thanks, and they do help to send other people in the direction of these podcasts. I'm on all the social media. As aforementioned, I have a YouTube channel, Toby Haydock. I'm on Twitter, @Haydock Podcasts and @Toby Haydock. And I have a Facebook page, and I'm on Instagram, @Toby.Haydock. So please do all of those things, or some of them, the ones that you're on. I know there's a mass exodus from X. There's an exodus at the moment because of the man I like to think of as Miss Evangelista's the double X husband. He's a double X husband because he was married to Tallulah Riley, who played Miss Evangelista twice, and she's now married to Thomas Brodie Sangster from Human Nature. So it's all. Doctor Who is still manages to be somehow very closely linked with all the stuff that's going on. But anyway, if you're still, I still haven't had the moral courage to be an Xer because I don't have the moral. There we go. I don't have the moral courage. I need to exist. I need to have my adventures inside a computation matrix. I feel safer that way. I really do need to get to the post office. So, and to the I mean, if you really want to know, I've told you about the garden. I've got to go to the post office. I've got to go to the chemist's, and both are going to close within the next 40 minutes or so. So, I will speak to you later. You've had plenty, and you know about my garden. I think that's enough. So I'm going to head off now and try not to tread on any big eggs on the way. Thanks for listening. I hope you are well.